Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 150 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I've found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider to be the requisite knowledge in order to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here, you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. The day I release this is the final day in April, so I'm getting this month's shout out to my patrons just in under the wire. Thank you one and all, with all being the following: Mike Sterling, Justin Bailey, Lily Breen, Jesse Clark, Ricky Garvin, Rob Garrison, Aaron Woodward, Aaron Borst, Carla Hoffman, Lyndon Onstead, Julio Herrera, and Matthew Saint. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. And if you want to join in with helping the show out, it's just $1 per month, and that gets you this monthly shout out, as well as audio outtakes and full scripts of every written show. Before I get started on this episode, I want to make sure you are all aware of another project I'm working on. Longtime friend and patron Carla Hoffman, who you may have heard me talk to on episode 136 of this show, asked me to join her on the first few episodes of her new podcast. I agreed, and quickly it became a permanent position as co-host. Together, we'll be watching each episode of the TV show Gotham that ran on Fox from 2014 to 2019. She's the hardcore fan, while I come to the show as the newbie. If you enjoy the deep dives I do here, I think you'll like this podcast as well. You can find it by searching Gothamites on any of your podcast catchers, or by visiting gothamitespod.com. The first episode was just released on Wednesday, so you can get in right from the start. With this being the 150th episode, I thought I'd do something a little different and pick out a couple of questions I've gotten that, while I don't think need full episodes to answer, still fit in the Welcome to Geektown wheelhouse. Let's start with one from frequent question asker and guest for the WandaVision deep dives, Joel L. A while back now, he wrote and said, "I finally got around to watching Eternals, and was surprised to see a reference in the MCU to a DC character. And then it happened a second time. It got me thinking. I remember Aunt May telling Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker,
'You're not Superman, you know.'
How often do the big two cross over or reference each other on screen? Crossover on screen, never. Reference each other, more often than you might think. However, most of it seems to go in one direction. As Joel noted, both Superman and Batman were referenced in the Eternals. First with Phastos' kid calling Icarus Superman, then later Gilgamesh referring to Kingo's valet being like Alfred. And pre-MCU, in addition to the Superman reference mentioned already, Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker makes reference to Superman and Shazam when trying to web-sling for the first time. Then we've got Happy Hogan in Iron Man 3 referring to the Avengers as the Super Friends, and most recently in Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special when Mantis uses her powers to make Kevin Bacon, quote, be a real hero. He calls himself Batman, then clarifies that he's Bruce Wayne. If you want a more meta reference, in Deadpool 2's end credit sequence, The lead character goes back in time and kills Ryan Reynolds as he's holding the script to the Green Lantern movie. And for the rare DC reference to Marvel, you have Stan Lee's cameo in the animated Teen Titans Go to the Movies. This isn't a complete list, as I'm not able to go through every single movie and find every single reference ever to characters from the other side, but it gives you an idea of what's going on with these two. Now, Joel had an addendum asking, do you think Marvel had to pay royalties to include the character names and descriptions in Eternals? And that is definitely no. This falls under the umbrella of descriptive fair use, where you're not actually using a trademark character, but simply naming them in order to refer to another person's product. This is the same reason that characters in Kevin Smith and Quentin Tarantino movies can make all the pop culture references they want without those writer-directors having to get permission or pay fees for every line. Now, if those characters actually show up, then you need to go through the legal legwork. Which is why in the Guardians holiday special mentioned earlier, when Drax and Mantis go to Man's Chinese Theater, Superman is not one of the cosplay characters seen, although if you go there in real life, you'll almost always see him there. Instead, they stick to Disney-owned properties like the other Marvel characters and Jack Sparrow, or public domain properties like a generic mummy. There is one non-Marvel property in that scene, as Drax nearly attacks a man dressed as a GoBot. But, as James Gunn noted on Twitter, he did get permission from Hasbro to use the property. Our other question is from Anthony H., who said, in Multiverse of Madness, I feel like I was supposed to notice things during the Montage of Multiverse. In case you're blanking on it, when Doctor Strange and America Chavez first travel using America's powers, they blip through a dozen or so different universes before landing on Earth 838. There are a couple of references in there, but watching it at full speed, you have to have a quick eye to notice any of them. The first is the most obvious, at least for longtime Marvel comic fans, which is in the first world they fly through, you can see multiple hooded heads floating in the air. These look very similar to the different aspects of the Living Tribunal, a cosmic character that oversees all reality in the Marvel Comics, and has crossed paths with Steven many times in his book. This is actually not the first reference to the character, as Mordo was using the Staff of the Living Tribunal when training Steven in the first Doctor Strange movie. The next world has a bunch of tendrils of light emanating from a single source. They reminded me of the various threads seen outside the domain of He Who Remains in the Loki TV series, but that could be just me. From there, we have a world of fire, a crystalline universe, then what appears to be a giant beehive, followed by an underwater seascape. We finally go back to a regular-looking world. The one item of note there is the taxicab that has a Grindhouse releasing ad on top. This is a small distribution company that Sam Raimi worked with on a re-release of the original Evil Dead movie, so that's just a small nod to a friend. After that brief respite, Doctor Strange and America continue their journey through more bizarre worlds, starting with a technological universe. You have to pause it just right, but there is a drone flying by in this one that has the Stark Industries logo on it, so perhaps Tony built his suit of armor around the world in this one. Then we get a hellscape made entirely of bones and guts on fire. There are multiple hell-like dimensions in the Marvel Universe, but there's not enough detail here to tie this to any specific one of those. Following that up, our heroes briefly pass through a jungle world with multiple dinosaurs in view. People have referred to this as the Savage Land, although in Marvel Comics continuity, that's not a separate universe, just a hidden tropical land under the Antarctic. kept warm by the geothermic heat of nearby volcanoes. After that, we get some fun music as the pair enter a universe that looks like an old cartoon version of New York City, except that it's more three-dimensional. The music goes sad and dark as they travel through a desolate New York following that, with some green fire seen in the background. The next world is entirely made out of cubes of various sizes, and while they fall through that universe, you can see Doctor Strange's face get sectioned off into cubes as well. I don't think it's a coincidence that this effect is very similar to one we see on one of the covers to the first issue of House of M, the story where Wanda, aka the Scarlet Witch, goes mad and ends up rewriting reality. Probably the most surreal world follows that, as our heroes turn to paint and flow through a universe entirely made of colorful globs. The next world is a pretty straightforward reference, being a sepia-toned Earth with a Zeppelin floating above a 30s-era New York. It's hard to tell through the breaking glass effect that accompanies each transition, but I believe the Zeppelin has a Hydra logo on the front of it. This to me looks like the Noir universe, one of the many alternate universes in Marvel Comics. I discussed that some in my Spider-Man Alternates episode, number 125. There's less than half a second in a world of ziggurats, then the characters go through a dark, futuristic-looking world, possibly the 2099 universe, which seems to be featured heavily in the upcoming sequel to the animated Into the Spider-Verse film. We get a couple of other fairly generic worlds that flash by super fast before the pair finally land on Earth 838, where the next act of the movie takes place. I think that covers all the references that I could spot in that brief scene, but if anyone saw any others, I'd love to hear them. There's one last thing I want to do before we wrap up. In some of my earlier episodes, I would discuss a line or other bit from pop culture that's been homaged and parodied so many times that some people, especially younger ones, may have seen the references but never discovered the original source. I'd like to go back to tagging those on occasionally, and thanks to a conversation I had on Twitter recently, I was reminded of one example I haven't discussed yet. You've probably heard this bit of music at some point in your life. Even if you haven't heard that particular clip, you may have heard music close enough to it for that to sound familiar. Likely you were watching a recent cartoon or sitcom where a standoff was going down, or a mysterious stranger entered the scene. In other words, some sort of homage or parody of a scene from a Western. Specifically, the creators of whatever show you're watching are calling back to Ennio Morricone's theme to the film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, directed by Sergio Leone and starring Clint Eastwood. This 1966 film is considered to be the definitive work in the spaghetti western genre, named such by film critics due to most of these movies being filmed in Italy, as well as other European countries. It's the final film in what's referred to as the Dollars trilogy, as the first two are A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More. The popularity of the movie and its main theme allowed the soundtrack to reach the top 5 on Billboard's album chart and became the pop culture touchstone it still is over 50 years later. Well, that wraps up our sesquicentennial episode, or episode 150 if you prefer not to use big words. Here's looking towards 150 more. But in order to do that, I'd really like to hear from you, whether that be with a pop culture reference you'd like to hear the origin of, or a question that you'd like answered as a full-length episode, or anything in between. You can send those, or just comments on the show in general, by sending me an email. My email address is welcometogeektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome to Geektown, Twitter at Geektown Podcast, or Mastodon at welcome to Geektown at mastodon.social. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, why not become a patron at patreon.com/welcome to Geektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them, welcome to Geektown, population, us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material of their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.